Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm here to react to the selection by the President of Andrew Wheeler to be the proposed number 2 at EPA. This is a selection that continues the Trump administration's essentially complete subservience to the fossil fuel industry in the entire environmental arena. I have described Scott Pruitt, Rick Perry, and Ryan Zinke over at Interior as the three stooges of the fossil fuel industry, and I reiterate that today. Scott Pruitt, in addition to being one of those stooges, also has some of the most extraordinary displays of self-serving political acts, unethical and self-serving political acts of anybody I've ever seen. I can only imagine what this floor would look like if an Obama appointee had engaged in those kind of behaviors. We would have had Republicans in all those seats shouting, jumping up and down, infuriated by that misconduct. But because it's Pruitt, because it's Trump, because the fossil fuel industry is getting everything it wants out of this guy, the silence is deafening. But that doesn't change the underlying fact that the American people are owed folks in high office who take their public duties seriously. There's very little chance that Mr. Wheeler is going to take his public duties seriously as number 2 at EPA, and it's not like at number 1 at EPA, there's a stopgap who's going to defend us. So this is a really dangerous duo. Scott Pruitt, the complete flunky of the fossil fuel industry, largely disgraced, but still hanging on there with his only claim to fame, that he will do anything the fossil fuel industry tells him to do. That's why he's hanging on. And now coal lobbyist Wheeler coming on to be his number 2. That is a dangerous combination to lead our Environmental Protection Agency. There was an interesting series of photographs that actually got the photographer fired in this administration for having released these photographs, but there was a little meeting over at the Energy Department with Secretary Perry, with Bob Murray, who is the head of Murray Energy. He's a coal baron, and he obviously has one interest in mind, which is sell more coal, burn more coal, and to heck with the rest of you, more or less. This was Mr. Murray arriving at the Department of Energy up in the conference room of the Secretary. The bald gentleman is Mr. Murray. The man whose head is obscured behind him in this torrid hug is our Energy Secretary. So you knew things were going to go well for Mr. Murray at this meeting after that nice cozy reception that he got. And then the photographer went on and took this picture, which is Murray Energy Corporation's recommendations to the Honorable J. Richard Perry as to what he should do about the environment. Now, I will spend some more time on that memo in just a moment, because after long delays, we're actually able to get our hands on it. They delayed and they fiddled and they faddled and they wouldn't confirm that they had it, but when the photograph showed that they had it, they said, okay, we'll give it to you when we give out our FOIA requests. Great, thanks a bunch. So much for congressional oversight. I hope that the now majority, if you're ever in the minority in the Senate, don't get treated this way, being told line up with the FOIA folks. We're not interested in responding to oversight requests for memos, but that's what we got. So here's another photograph from that meeting. There's Mr. Murray telling the Energy Secretary what to do. There's the Energy Secretary, fresh out of his nice hug, being told what to do. And here is Mr. Wheeler, the guy who's going to be the number 2 at EPA, right in the room where the Murray directions to the Trump administration were being discussed and delivered. So let's take a look at, ask unanimous consent that this document be attached to an exhibit at the end of my remarks. So here's the action plan. Dear Secretary Perry, it says, enclosed is an action plan for achieving reliable and low-cost electricity in America and to assist in the survival of our country's coal industry. So, what are the recommendations? Page 1, suspend the coal-fired power plant effluent limitation guidelines. Yes, why would we want limitations on the effluent that a coal-fired power plant can emit? Why on earth would anybody want that? Nope. Suspend those is one of the recommendations. Second is withdraw and suspend the so-called endangerment finding. Well, the endangerment finding is the fact-based finding at EPA that shows that in addition to, as a matter of law, pursuant to Massachusetts versus EPA, carbon dioxide is a pollutant in the air. This is the agency finding that it's actually a dangerous pollutant in the air. That's why it's called the endangerment finding. So they want to knock that out so they can knock out regulation of more coal-powered power plant effluents, including carbon dioxide. Then they want to eliminate the tax credit for wind and solar. Okay, here is an industry that gets, according to the International Monetary Fund, $700 billion, with a B, billion dollars a year in effective subsidy in the United States of America alone. And their goal is to knock out the little production tax credit that wind and solar get. That's what he asked for. Withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. Well, we all know that he was obeyed on that. Here's a particularly good one. End ozone regulations. End ozone regulations. Let me tell you what Rhode Island's experience in this is. The Midwestern power plants burn coal and other fossil fuels. They run the exhaust out smokestacks. Many of them have raised enormously high smokestacks to get all that stuff high up in the air so that it is then carried by prevailing winds out of their state. Out of their state. And as it bakes in the heat, as it travels through the air, it becomes ozone. And that ozone lands in Rhode Island. Ladies and gentlemen, children go to the hospital because of asthma complications from ozone in Rhode Island. We have had periods when on a bright and sunny day, the talk radio on the ways, your drive time radio is announcing to Rhode Islanders that today is a bad air day in the state of Rhode Island, and the elderly and babies and people with any kind of breathing difficulty should stay indoors. You are not welcome out of doors because of ozone levels. This guy wants to end ozone regulation. I think not. And this guy was his lobbyist in trying to do that. That's what has become of EPA. What else? Overturn the cross-state air pollution rule. Rhode Island doesn't create much air pollution. The EPA protects Rhode Island from other states' air pollution with, guess what? The cross-state air pollution rule. He wants to overturn it. And finally, cut the staff of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in at least half. Well, they're doing a pretty good job at destroying the Environmental Protection Agency as an agency that does environmental protection. But I gotta say, cutting the agency in half and firing half of it, that seems a bit much. They also want justices of the Supreme Court who will rule in favor of coal, They want replaced all the members of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, members of the Tennessee Valley Authority Board, and the members of the National Labor Relations Board. And of course, there's a bunch in there to make sure that coal safety regulations are undone. But that is what we are dealing with. We are dealing with an agency that has been taken over by the fossil fuel industry, and it has gotten so bad that I want to conclude with this editorial, which I will ask unanimous consent to have attached as an exhibit at the end of my remarks. If I may ask unanimous consent, Mr. President, for that.
Without objection.
Thank you. Here's a editorial from, of all places, the Charleston, West Virginia Gazette-Mail. I think the body can take notice that West Virginia is more or less the heart of coal country. And here is what the Charleston, West Virginia Gazette-Mail said about where things are at EPA right now. The title was, "With Self-Serving Pruitt at EPA, Trump is Building a Swamp." And here are some selections. Donald Trump campaign crowds love to chant, "Drain the swamp." But if ever there was a political swamp creature, it's Scott Pruitt, the man Trump picked to head the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. The Charleston, West Virginia Gazette-Mail continues, "Pruitt has been a shill for fossil fuel industries since his days as Attorney General in Oklahoma, so maybe he saw this, all his self-aggrandizing expenditures, as his just deserts. But of all the Trump administration flunkies who have used taxpayer money for their personal benefit, Pruitt may be the worst." The word from Charleston, West Virginia. Some of the examples: Pruitt used a loophole in the Safe Drinking Water Act that's supposed to let the EPA hire experts quickly in a drinking water emergency to give taxpayer-funded raises to, quote, political lackeys. He took first-class charter and military flights that cost taxpayers $163,000. He tripled the size of his security detail. He had the EPA spend $25,000. I think we actually know that that's actually up to $43,000 now, quote, to build a soundproof communications booth in his office. Yep, there's nothing the EPA administrator needs like a cone of silence soundproof communications booth in his office, like he's running the CIA or something. Here's how they conclude in Charleston, West Virginia. There are many reasons why Scott Pruitt shouldn't be leading the EPA. Primarily, that he doesn't seem to believe in science and is more interested in helping big business than, you know, protecting the environment. But his obvious belief that taxpayer money and resources are given to him for his personal benefit is a big reason as well. I thank the newspaper in West Virginia for acknowledging that some conduct is so disgraceful that it goes too far. And when that is the #1 person at EPA, we have no business confirming this as the #2 person at EPA. With that, Mr. President, I see colleagues on the floor who I assume want to speak in favor of this nominee, and I will yield the floor to them.